If you've watched my channel or any of the content I've made over the past year, it's pretty clear that the games I play and enjoy are very much influenced by the types of games I played growing up, which for a lot of people is probably true regarding most things. Our tastes in movies, music, art, food, anything you can think of can probably be traced back to your earlier years. While I was producing the Darkness the Forgotten franchise, link to that below, there was a shot of me flipping through an old Game Informer that I had kept since around 2006. This triggered a huge wave of nostalgia in me, but not so much for the articles themselves, but for the advertising that was seen in the Game Informer. I vividly remember looking at these advertisements and being struck by a sense of wonder about the game. They made even the most boring games look interesting, and made me want to give them a shot. In the advertising world, print advertising has seemed like a less and less common occurrence over the years. I mean, when's the last time you can honestly say you bought a magazine? Now think back even further. When's the last time you can say you bought a video game magazine? There was a time where all three big console manufacturers in Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo all had magazines for their specific consoles, but now these are no longer in publication. However, there are other video game magazine publications still kicking around to this day, including PC Gamer and Game Informer. So in a sense, video game print advertising is very quickly becoming lost. So I felt very compelled to make a video diving deeper into the topic. So today, come along with me on an exploration of video game print advertising from decades past. One of the very first video game magazines published was in 1981, titled Computer and Video Games. This magazine is absolutely fascinating as it covers a wide variety of topics, including articles about PC programming and how to make your own video games, and even advertising. Although in this magazine, most of the advertising was primarily focused on the computers themselves. There were several instances, however, where video games were a focal point, including this ad for the Atom computer from Acorn Computer. In my mind, this is a perfect example of a lot of video game ads from this time period. Let's take a look at it. So we have several screens, some of which look to show games, but then you also have several massive blocks of text, talking about things like the specs of the computer and other various features. And to the ad's credit, it does a really good job of conveying all of the most impressive things about the machine. But its biggest shortcoming, in my opinion, is that it's an overload of information. But this really isn't the fault of the ad itself, as there is simply a lot of this in this era. There's also a ton of ads out there for computers in this similar time period that look incredibly similar to this one. I will say that one thing the ad does incredibly well is it just hits you with a ton of color, and really makes the graphical capabilities of the machine stand out. So let's stay in this same year and try to pivot to an ad more about the games, where we don't necessarily care about the device in and of itself, but more about what is possible on it and the experiences that you can have on the device. So here we have an ad from Atari, and hey, there are video games here. So my eye immediately goes to the boxes of the video games on the ad. They have all these really cool colors with different images on them. Then we have a picture of the device itself. See, I wasn't lying about the block of text thing. They are everywhere in older advertisements. I really like the design of this ad for a couple reasons. It obviously accomplishes what they were going for in making you think, oh wow, I should get an Atari, there's a ton of games here, but it also unintentionally foreshadows the great video game collapse. For those of you who are unaware, there were so many games of poor quality just being pumped out for the 2600 that it eventually led to consumers in the US just not being interested in video games at all. Here's an ad from 1982 for the game Zaxxon from Sega. This ad is really interesting as it actually shows gameplay. Now remember this detail for later on, and it goes on into great detail about describing the gameplay in the text below. Let's fast forward a little bit to the mid to late 1980s. By this point, video games are starting to become more and more mainstream, and companies like Nintendo and Sega, but mostly Nintendo, sorry Master System, have entered into the arena. Before we look at some of the more stylistic NES ads, I wanted to show off this Target advertisement. This is an ad that most likely would have appeared in an insert in the local paper, or as a flyer or something similar to that. What's unique about this ad compared to some of the other more put together, carefully designed by marketing advertisements, is that it actually tells us how expensive the system and games are. So for $139.99 you get a ROB, NES Zapper, Nintendo Control Deck, 2 NES controllers, 2 NES games, packs, which include Duck Hunt and Gyromite, and then the NES itself. So in today's money, $139 for all of that is a fantastic deal. Heck, if you threw all of those items in a cart on eBay, they'd be easily way more than that. But how much is $139 1985 in 2021 dollars? Well, $354.67. So even in today's money, that's not a terrible deal. So if you have your DeLorean handy, please feel free to pick me up this combo from Target. But then we also have several games along the bottom of the screen, including Mario Bros. Overall, a pretty cool little insert. I wish I got this in my mailbox instead of these. Oh look, chicken's on sale. So now we're in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and video games ads are starting to have a really edgy, in a cool way, not a weird way, style to them. Here's one for Mega Man 3 on the NES, with a simple tagline of, Mega Man 3, anything else you need to know? This ad also features two very small screenshots of gameplay. This is something that doesn't go away and becomes even more prevalent as we march towards the 2000s. This ad also shows box art for the game. Side note, I really like how old box art didn't fit into a template like newer boxes do. Really, it just seemed like manufacturers were allowed to get creative at this time, and that was something that was super awesome to see as I was doing research for this video. So here's an ad that, in my opinion, perfectly exemplifies the style of all the ads we've talked about so far in this video. This is an ad for Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. It features, once again, a solid block of text talking about all the details of the game. It shows the box art of the game, really small gameplay, and artwork that represents this theme of the game, but not necessarily what the game is going to look like. And heck, it even has a cool slogan. This ad, which I think is really cool, also features a little public service announcement at the bottom saying that the shortage is over and you're now able to buy the original Castlevania in stores. Apparently this was a really big problem when this game was coming out. So look, there's tons of really cool ads from this era to look at, but to avoid the video becoming stale, let's fast forward to the N64 PS1 generation, or more commonly referred to as the 5th generation. As in my mind, this is when print ads started to really hit their stride. But there were also some really solid ones from the 4th generation that I don't want to skip over, so editor, start the montage. Alright, welcome back from the montage. You probably noticed that it's clear that in that generation, that ads began to shift. They stopped overly relying on huge blocks of text and instead focused on large amounts of style, and even began to feature sort of an extremeness, which can be seen in this SNES advertisement, which I think is really cool, no pun intended. Well, those themes and ideas definitely carried over to the next generation of consoles. Here's an ad for the forgotten mascot Gex. Gex was a 3D platformer that was pretty popular on the original PlayStation. Notice how the big blocks of text are totally gone. This doesn't mean that they're entirely absent from this generation of consoles, but it's definitely something that we're going to be seeing a lot and a lot less of. We also have a big and blown up image of Gex the Gecko and a slogan that tries to encapsulate what the theme of Gex is. So here's an ad for one of my favorite franchises of all time in Resident Evil. What I like about this ad is that it really tries to encapsulate the fear and suspense that you'll feel while playing this game. And honestly, I think it does a really awesome job of doing that. At the time it debuted, the original Resident Evil was known for being absolutely terrifying and unlike anything the general public had seen up to that point. This ad is really good at encapsulating that feeling. Let's keep moving forward along to the next generation of consoles. This is really my favorite generation of ads, as this is when I grew up and I can vividly remember looking at these ads in either Nintendo Power or Game Informer and just wanting to play each game that was being shown to me. This generation also turned the sort of cool edge aesthetic up to 11, and honestly, it's just awesome. So let's start this section of the video off talking about Nintendo. Nintendo has always been known, as I'm sure you're all aware, for producing wholesome, solid, and fantastic gaming experiences, but even they couldn't escape the cool edge aesthetic of the mid-2000s. My personal favorite of all their ads of this time was their "Who Are You" line of advertisements. These advertisements would often take a pretty standard image of some real-world place or thing, and then plaster Nintendo-related images on top of them in sort of a paper cutout style. Take a look at a few of these. I also really like how each of these ads has a blurb at the bottom essentially telling the reader that the real world is kind of boring and that Nintendo games are way more interesting, so they should just stay inside and play their GameCube instead. Once again, we see small images of gameplay here, so let's cut to the point and stop wondering why these are here and let's sort of dissect it. After giving it some critical thought, it's pretty easy to figure out why this might be. It's much more effective to show a static image of something funny or outrageous rather than showing some gameplay that could be taken out of context, or worse, could look look boring or uninteresting. Let's see an example of this using one of my favorite games, The Simpsons Hit and Run. So I've compiled 3 screenshots of what I personally think are interesting moments in the game. Now let's add some company logos and voila, we have an advertisement. But let's ask ourselves, does this ad look better than the professionally done, static image ad? Well, obviously not. See, it's very hard to capture the essence of the game in a few screenshots. It's also equally difficult to capture the attention of someone who's already going through a magazine, seeing tons and tons of ads. These next 2 ads are some of my favorite of the generation. Here's an ad of a hyper-realistic environment, and there are posters displaying cover art of the game, as well as posters displaying screenshots of gameplay. I really like how the advertisement itself is blended into a real-world environment. It looks like something you might actually see on a street. Then here's an ad for Crash Bandicoot that I like just because of how over the top it is. As you know, every few years we are given new consoles, and each console manufacturer is vying for your attention and for you to purchase their machine over their competitors. Sony did this when the PS3 Slim launched, and had several interesting advertisements, which looked to showcase all the things the PS3 could do. Here's my personal favorite of the 3, with the tagline, "Judgment Day is coming, aliens need to be killed." This ad is of course referring to both the Resistance franchise, probably Resistance 2 specifically, and Terminator Judgment Day, which both released around the same time as the PS3 Slim. Of course, this ad looks to call out the fact that the PS3 Slim can play both video games and Blu-rays. It also does this by highlighting games and Blu-rays on the advertisement. It also shows us all the other things the PS3 can do. Then gives us a glimpse of the PS3 Slim itself, and also shows us aliens and the Terminator. Another ad in this campaign that I found interesting was this one, with the tagline, "Dance with zombies before blowing their heads off." Of course, this one is specifically showing the PS3's ability to both play games and play music, but the reason I like this ad so much is that it specifically uses the word before. You see, on the PS3, you are unable, at least you were unable, to play both music and video games at the same time on your PS3 console. This was something that frustrated me a ton growing up when I was a teenager, especially when the Xbox 360 could do it without much of an issue at all. Speaking of the Xbox 360, it had ads of its own when it launched in 2005, including this advertisement for the wireless 360 controller. So you see, in 2005, wireless controllers were a big deal. The previous generation had them, but didn't receive massive first-party manufacturer support outside of a few exceptions like the famous Nintendo Wavebird GameCube controller. Most companies just stayed with wired controllers at that time. So that's what makes this ad interesting. It has sort of a cool future is now aesthetic. The 360 controller is floating, and we're given information about various other 360 accessories. Before we depart, I wanted to take a look at another type of print advertisement, the kind that encapsulates the spirit of the game without showing any gameplay at all. Here's one for the original Resident Evil. This one does a good job of letting you know what the series is about, obviously zombies, while also demonstrating that this is a new and unique horror experience. Sticking with the Resident Evil franchise, here's a few advertisements for Resident Evil 5. Showing regular people with nutritional information printed on their shirt. The bottom right corner features a logo and the tagline, "You are on the menu." And finally, here's one for Halo Anniversary Edition on the Xbox 360. What I really like about this ad is that it leans into the game's biggest feature, which was the ability to switch between modern graphics and older original Xbox graphics with the click of a button. Well, that's all for today, YouTube. Let me know in the comments below if you've enjoyed this type of content. I realize it's kind of different from the Forgotten franchises that I've been doing. Be sure to check those out if you're interested, but it's sort of nice to mix it up and hopefully you agree. Like and subscribe for more content, but most importantly, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.